The old cemetery was draped in an eerie silence. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the cold night air. A hunter's moon hung high in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the weathered tombstones. Leonard Hart, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation, crept through the graveyard. He clutched a shovel in his sweaty hands. Leonard wasn't a man to be easily scared. He had been to countless funerals, witnessing grief firsthand. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was there for himself. His greed had led him to this unsettling place. He was after the rumored riches buried with Adelina, the Witch of Willow Creek. The air grew colder as he approached the ancient willow tree. Its branches, gnarled and twisted with age, seemed to reach out to him like skeletal fingers. The old wives' tales he'd heard as a child echoed in his mind. He swallowed hard, pushing down the rising fear. There was no turning back now. He had to find the grave before sunrise. The wind picked up, swirling around him like a living thing. Leonard shivered, pulling his thin jacket tighter around himself. He could have sworn he heard whispers carried on the wind, voices whispering his name. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. It was just the wind. It had to be. He consulted the crude map he had sketched based on stories and rumors. The grave was supposed to be marked by a broken headstone, split clean in two by Adelina's untamed magic. His heart leaped as he spotted it, half hidden beneath a thicket of overgrown ivy. The sight of the name, barely visible beneath years of grime and decay, sent shivers down his spine. He had found it. The final resting place of Adelina, the witch who had haunted his childhood nightmares. His hands trembled as he gripped the shovel, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. He hesitantly stepped forward, the dead leaves crunching ominously beneath his worn leather boots. He stood before the grave, his breath catching in his throat. He was about to make a grave mistake. Leonard worked quickly, his earlier fear replaced by a grim determination. The earth was surprisingly soft, yielding easily to his shovel. Soon, the wooden lid of the coffin lay exposed, its surface rotten and decayed. Taking a deep breath, he pried open the coffin. A musty odor wafted out, making him gag. He peered inside. Lying within was the perfectly preserved body of Adelina. Her eyes snapped open, burning with an eerie green light that seemed to pierce through him. He recoiled in horror, stumbling backward. He had expected a corpse, something decaying and skeletal. Instead, he found himself staring into the eyes of a woman who seemed very much alive. Her long white hair cascaded around her, a stark contrast to the rich velvet dress she wore. A low growl escaped her lips, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within his bones. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped him. He wanted to run, to flee from the sight before him, but his legs refused to obey. He was frozen in place, trapped by the witch's hypnotic gaze. The next morning, news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Leonard Hart, the gravedigger's son, had lost his mind. They found him babbling incoherently at the edge of town, his eyes wide with terror, his clothes torn and covered in dirt. He kept repeating the same delirious phrase, "She's awake! She's awake!" At first, people dismissed it as a drunken hallucination. Leonard was known to enjoy his spirits a little too much. But then, the strange occurrences began. Livestock went missing, their bodies drained of blood. Unexplained illnesses swept through the town, leaving people weak and disoriented. Children swore they saw shadowy figures lurking in the woods, their eyes glowing with an eerie green light. Whispers of a curse, long dormant, spread through the town. Fear, thick and suffocating, settled over Willow Creek. Section 5. The Price of Greed. Leonard, meanwhile, wasted away. His once robust frame grew gaunt, his skin pallid and clammy. He was haunted by nightmares, visions of Adelina's vengeful eyes burning into his soul. He became a recluse, shunning all contact with the townsfolk. He would sit for hours in his dilapidated shack, rocking back and forth, clutching at his thinning hair, his eyes filled with a nameless terror. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, crushing him under the knowledge of the evil he had unleashed. The gold he had stolen from Adelina's grave lay untouched in a dusty corner. It had lost all its appeal. It was a constant, tangible reminder of his greed, his folly, and the terrible price he was now paying. He no longer cared about riches, only about escaping the haunting presence that seemed to follow his every move. Section 6. The Witch's Vengeance. As the days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences escalated. Crops withered and died, the land itself seeming to reject life. The once vibrant town of Willow Creek was now shrouded in a palpable sense of dread. The townsfolk, their faces etched with fear and desperation, gathered in hushed groups, whispering about the curse and its terrifying implications. The name Adelina was uttered with a mixture of fear and reverence. Some recalled the stories their grandparents had told, tales of the witch's power and her thirst for vengeance. They spoke of her untimely demise, accused of witchcraft by a fearful and superstitious mob. The townsfolk, desperate to break the curse, tried everything they could think of. They held prayer vigils, offered sacrifices at the edge of the forest, even consulted with traveling healers and exorcists, but their efforts were in vain. The curse, like a dark stain, continued to spread, tightening its grip on Willow Creek. Section 7. Shadows of Doubt. Some, however, refused to believe in curses and witches. They pointed to the strange illnesses plaguing the townsfolk, suggesting a natural cause. Others whispered about poisonous mushrooms, contaminated water, even foul play. They questioned Leonard's sanity, speculating about his motives. Was he truly haunted by a vengeful spirit, or was he merely a desperate man driven mad by guilt? The seeds of doubt were sown, dividing the town further as fear and suspicion took root. Yet, despite their doubts, no one dared to approach Leonard. He was avoided like the plague, his name whispered with a mixture of pity and fear. He had become a living reminder of the evil that lurked beneath the surface of their once peaceful town. Section 8. A Desperate Attempt. Driven to desperation, the townsfolk decided on one final, desperate act. They would exhume Adelina's remains, cleanse the bones with holy water, and rebury her with prayers and offerings. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble fueled by fear and waning hope. Under the pale light of a waning moon, a small group of brave souls gathered at the edge of the cemetery. Armed with shovels and pickaxes, their faces illuminated by flickering torches, they set about their grim task. The air crackled with tension as they broke ground, each clang of metal against earth echoing in the stillness of the night. They worked through the night, their fear a tangible presence in the cold air. Finally, as the first rays of dawn pierced through the darkness, they reached the coffin. But when they pried it open, they were met with an empty grave. Section 9. The Lingering Curse. The discovery of the empty grave sent a shockwave through Willow Creek. The last vestiges of hope crumbled into dust. Adelina's remains were gone, and with them, any chance of appeasing her vengeful spirit. The curse remained unbroken, its grip on the town tighter than ever. The strange occurrences continued, more frequent and more terrifying than before. Animals and people alike disappeared without a trace, their fates unknown. The once picturesque town was now a shell of its former self, haunted by fear and despair. The townsfolk, their spirits broken, resigned themselves to their fate. They lived in the shadow of the curse, their lives forever tainted by Leonard's grave mistake. Section 10. Abandoned and Forgotten. As the years passed, Willow Creek slowly emptied. Families packed their belongings and fled, seeking refuge from the curse that plagued their town. Houses stood empty, their windows dark and lifeless. Shops boarded up, their wares left to gather dust. The cemetery, once a place of peace and remembrance, became a symbol of fear and despair. No one dared to venture there anymore, not even the bravest soul. The old willow tree, its branches gnarled and twisted, stood sentinel over the forgotten graves. And as for Leonard Hart, he vanished one night, never to be seen again. Some whispered that he had been driven mad by guilt and had wandered into the woods, never to return. Others claimed that Adelina had finally claimed her ultimate revenge, dragging him down to the underworld to suffer for all eternity. Whatever his fate, Leonard Hart became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the price of greed and the terrible consequences of disturbing the eternal slumber of the dead.